those. I will say, because I was involved at this level, that there was a very extensive programme of planning for Go Live over 12 months with all the kinds of activities that, as I said this morning, you'd expect in terms of leading up to the introduction of a major critical programme, including tabletop testing exercises and so on, as well as obviously all the training. That did not reveal all the issues. We did not anticipate all the issues that actually we did experience. And you'll know of some of those issues from your own districts. But what I can say is that since those problems emerged, we've all worked very hard, not least the staff leading this programme, to listen to what's happening in the districts, to listen to our officers, and to develop the workarounds in terms of some of those issues whilst we make sure that the system is up and running as we wanted it to be. Again, a point made this morning, this is not the end of the journey. This is the start of a major transformational programme. As you heard, there will be a whole series of enhancements to this software and the platform that we're creating as time goes on. The situation is stable now. Those issues are being worked through and largely resolved. And I just wanted to repeat what I said this morning, which is a big thank you to colleagues from the districts and from our partner organisations in the CPS and the courts who have helped us during this period and been very clear actually that they wanted us to stick with the implementation, because as we get through it and bring the system up to its true potential, it will be transformational for everybody. So I'll ask the Chief Constable to build on the presentation I had this morning from ACC Potts, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chief Constable.
Thank you. I'm really excited by this programme, I have to say. Delighted that Tony Lloyd as the Police and Crime Commissioner and Beverly Hughes as the Deputy Mayor have continued to support the programme, because it was essential. And the bigger risk in all of this, despite everything that you may have seen, the bigger risk was sticking with the system that we had, because GMPICS in particular, which was the command and control system, an old green screen, 1980s Space Invaders looking machine, was on the brink of catastrophic failure. And actually the day that we switched over to the new system, it failed completely. Now, if that had happened without all of the planning and preparation over the last 5 years to get us to this point, we would have been sat here in a very different position to the one that we find ourselves today. Not least, we've been criticised by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary for at least the last decade about the state of our IS systems in Greater Manchester Police. And the Independent Information System survey that's undertaken nationally for the police service, there was also significant criticism. Now, that criticism was coming from our staff of the existing systems, both Opus, the intelligence system, as well as GMPICS. I think the other point is policing has changed fundamentally in the last decade, and so much more reliance on technology and how we use data, how we keep data safe, how we share data with partners is a crucial element to this. And what the new system allows us to do is have one system. So we train people on one system. They have one set of logins, lots of credentials, and the IOPS stands for Integrated Operating Systems. So it is about joining it all up so that ultimately we have a much better product. Now, there's been obviously lots of issues, and I can't think of one IT programme that's been implemented nationally where it's gone flawlessly. I seriously can't. And I would just suggest to you that if you've got a spare moment, Google Victoria, Derbyshire and Athena. And that will refer you to, not IOPS when you read the headlines, because as one or two of my staff around the districts when I went to visit them all thought it was. It refers to the 9 forces in the eastern region of England when they launched their Northgate programme called Athena earlier in the year, and the headlines were pretty much the same as you've seen around ours, with initial problems that need to be worked through. As with all major IT programmes, what you get on day one becomes very different as time goes by, because you get software updates in the same way as your mobile phone will tell you to update it regularly. that's what you get with the system. So there was always planned future drops, future enhancements as we moved forward. I think one of the other points, and then I'll just come on to some of the problems, there's two elements to what we've taken. So there's 7 projects that have made up the whole information system transformation programme, which is the 71 million pound overall programme. There's 7 projects within that, of which IOPS is one. Okay? And IOPS essentially replaced command and control, intelligence, case and custody. And it's the new products, there's 2, one called PoliceWorks, one called ControlWorks. They're both Capita products. ControlWorks is tried and tested command and control system, is very, very good. The West Midlands will be going live with it next month. Police Service of Northern Ireland have had it for some considerable time. ControlWorks is a new product that Capita have developed, and we're the first to take it, and that's what PoliceWorks, sorry, and that's what Beverly Hughes has said. In that's what makes this exciting, because we're able to bring it all together and really integrate it in a way that hasn't been done previously. And fair to say that most of the issues that we faced have been in PoliceWorks. Lots of the staff in the control room are saying that the new system is significantly better, and it varies, because some staff have been using the same system for getting on for 3 decades, and of course it's like losing your old trusted friend, and you get something new, it takes time to adjust to it. But the overwhelming feedback, and actually the Mayor Andy Burnham came and visited, and unprompted staff were telling him it was absolutely brilliant in terms of what they were doing. Andy sat and took some calls and could see how intuitive the system was, and how they were able to deal with some really significant emergencies in a very different way. PoliceWorks is where most of the problems have been, and the biggest problem that we've had really and still have is around the criminal justice system. And it has been problematic. The transfer of files to the CPS was problematic, but is now running at about 95% of the time it's working correctly. That's probably about the same as we were getting with the previous system. We've had some issues with voluntary attendance. Many of you will know that because of the changes to the Bail Act, and we no longer release very many people on bail, it's under investigation. And because of Code G of the Police and Crime Evidence Act, we have very stringent rules about who can be taken into custody for what reason. So there's less and less people going into custody. So more crimes are dealt with through voluntary attendance at police stations. And the voluntary attendance part of the system has been quite problematic. The fix for that has gone in today. So there are quite a lot of backlogs in that system, which we are working through. So some of the stuff that's been said, cases are being lost at court, all of those sorts of things. Martin Goldman, the head of the CPS, and I are unaware of any cases that have been lost at court in relation to IOPS. There is one from last Friday where there's a potential link to some forensics, but it's unlikely to be solely IOPS related, if at all. There will be other issues, which is what we've been seeing with a number of the cases in court. And what has been happening is the moment that something goes wrong, well, it's down to IOPS. It's become that difficult on occasions. But, I have in writing from Martin that they're solely focused on evidence, and whilst it has been problematic, and the CPS have been brilliant working with us, as have the courts, we can't put anything down to IOPS. Now, voluntary attendance is undoubtedly going to lead to some delays going through the system, and again we'll work, as we have been with the CPS, to make sure that we're pushing some of those through. Probably one or two of the other bits that you've seen, the emergency button not working. Again, some initial teething difficulties, but again, a lot of it about understanding how the system works, and reminding colleagues of their street craft as a police officer, that you don't rely on a satellite to give you location in an emergency. The first thing you do when you press the button is you give your location. And some people seem to have forgotten that that's the first thing that you do. And the secondary system is the mapping system, which links to GPS in the same way as your phone do. If there's no GPS signal, you're not going to show on a map. If you've moved, and you've lost the signal, it'll show you in a different space. So we've done a lot of work reassuring colleagues around how the system works and testing it and all of those sorts of things. The previous system was not fail-proof either. It can't be because it relies on GPS. The Police Federation are extremely happy with everything that we've done. One of my assistant chief constables, Chris Sykes, spent 2 hours with the Police Federation Council locally a couple of weeks ago, and they're very pleased with progress that's been made and the support that's been given. I spent hours and hours a couple of weeks ago visiting many districts and listening to the concerns of staff, as have some of my other chief officer colleagues. There's been a big programme of support. We are still in what we call the hypercare period, and I think Rob will have touched on that in the wider briefing. And we continue to support and listen to colleagues and work through issues. This is going to take several months further down the line to get it completely where we want to get it, and then there'll be enhancements in the future that will perhaps, as it always is when you put new code into a system, will stop something working in the way that it currently does, and we have to go back and fix it. This morning I met with a senior executive from Capita, and their reiteration was they are absolutely in this for the long term with us, to work with us to make sure that it works. And overall, you know, the programme remains in budget, which I think is a really important thing to say, and it was designed to stop GMP being a software developer, because quite frankly we can't afford to be software developers, and we can't afford to have a huge IT department that supports the development of software, because it's too expensive and you can't keep up fast enough. So there are ongoing revenue savings because of the way we've restructured our overall IT department, moving to a managed service that provide us with some long-term benefits as well as the operational ones.
Deputy Mayor, Chief Constable, thanks for that honest and reflective view of the implementation of the system. I know members were privy to a briefing earlier, which actually did highlight some of the concerns which I think you've outlined in your response there, but I know there's a few questions from members. So I've taken them in batches of 3, and then we can look for response. So I've got Amanda, Janet and Stephen, the first 3. Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. We've had some concerns expressed in our last council meeting around the access to information for officers when they are called out to certain incidents. They don't have access to the information about residents that may be in the home, whether it's a vulnerable adult, a child that's under a safeguarding order, or somebody who's got a history of violence. I'm looking for some reassurances that that isn't the case and that any glitches in that department have been resolved.
And to follow on from that, the no warning markers against children's names, potentially with catastrophic results, if that's true, can you reassure us on that? And domestic violence notifications being affected as teams haven't been able to generate a dash, so they're doing paper versions and then inputting manually, which creates an operational delay. And then the last thing that I'd like to mention is the comms around all of this, and how perhaps the communication could have been a lot better if we've already had another force that's introduced this kind of a system. Perhaps we could have learnt from them.
Nigel, do you mind if I ask the Chief Constable the same 3 questions they asked to the ACC before? And I've got a question for Bev later on at the end if time will permit. Chief Constable, nice to see you again, sir. Ian, I've got to ask you this. From a human perspective, just tell me what's this been like, because I can just see it that all of a sudden this piece of hardware arrives on whatever day it was, and all of a sudden there's difficulties with it. I mean, I've got to say, just as everybody, this, you must have gone on at night, you must be thinking it's doing me head in this, because it's just so challenging. But from a Bobby's point of view, you can just picture it, can't you? He or she is trying to go and use this equipment, and they're going to you, boss, it doesn't work. You want me to be a Bobby, you want me to be effective in this day and age, and I can't because the equipment don't work. How do you handle that? The other one is this. If you could go back 6 months ago and you could think, right, it's coming, this tidal wave of battles coming to us now, we've got to be ready, Greater Manchester's got to be ready. What would you have done differently all those months ago if you knew you was going to have that problem now? And this is probably the best one, Ian. This is the best one. If it was today, today, if you, when you leave here today now, if you had a wish list, we could put something right today, forget the money, but you could fix it today that had solved some of those big problems, what would it be? Thank you.
I think you've got a good range of questions there to start off with.
I thought they were batches of 3, not 3 each.
Yeah, there we go.
That's 9 questions. Put my mic back on, I forget that bit. I'm not loud enough. Okay, so the system works very differently to previous system. So it works on something that's called POL, People, Object, Location and Event. And that is the new national standard for how you use data in policing. Okay, so there are a number of forces that will not be able to meet that standard with their existing IS systems. And I won't say it because we're live stream, but one of the systems that we rejected during the procurement process is one of those systems which 28 forces have. They'll never be able to meet that standard. Our new system operates to that standard. So it's taken a lot of understanding for people to realise that it's different. So markers don't necessarily go on people because markers go on people, they don't go on addresses because people move. So the threat moves with them. And actually, if you leave a marker on an address, you potentially create a risk in that address for somebody who is not any threat to any response. Now, that doesn't stop us putting an event warning on an address. So we might want to do it temporarily for something. And a good example of that is Operation Bridger, the stuff that we've been doing around supporting our members of Parliament in terms of some of the abuse that we've got, being able to flag addresses that are subject to that. But it's about the person and the marker going on the person. So that's the bit that's taken some time to get over. So markers are still there, and ultimately the Police National Computer has been there from day one, as it always was, and that's the go-to thing that you check. So that has firearms, drugs, weapons, violence, etc. on it. Now what we did, and this was a big decision, and actually we, through Bev's scrutiny of the whole programme, we spent a long time talking about what were we to do about the transfer of old legacy data into the new system, because one of the drivers for changing the system was that our data was so poor, it was creating significant risk for us. So just an example, we have in the old system, in GMPICS, we had 5,000 individual addresses for GMP buildings. Trust me, we have not got 5,000 buildings. And that's because people can create anything because of all of the free text in it. So if they couldn't find something, well, it's quicker, let's just create a new address. So it might be slightly out in how they spelt the street, or it might be slightly out in the postcode, but it creates a new record. So our records management was not fit for purpose and does not fit with GDRP and all of those things. So we create a new system that stops people making all those mistakes themselves. There's lots of drop-down menus and they can't proceed until they've done it correctly. So we had this big discussion about what data do we move over from the old system into the new system. And we went for critical data that was an issue in terms of threat to communities, threat to officers, and we went for the top cases in terms of that. Everything else remained in the legacy system, which was searchable. Okay, so it was archived but searchable. So what we had in the very early days and weeks was people saying it's not there, which is the comment that's been made. We can't see this markers on children. We can't see this risk about this individual. That was about a lack of understanding, which isn't a blame on anybody, that actually the old system was there and people could search it. And over time, the strategy is that the system, the information going into the new system becomes up to date, it is accurate and timely, and over time the old system will become irrelevant. So that's how we're still working, balancing the two, but sort of 10, 11 weeks into the new system, we're much, much better now in terms of the access to that data. The history of violence was absolutely there. And when I came to speak to leaders probably about 4 weeks ago, You know, I'd only the day before sat next to a call taker who dealt with a domestic in Newton Heath, and she could see all the drugs markers, all the warnings about the children in that house, and she dealt with that, sat next to me on the phone, and you can absolutely see it there. So those things have always been there, and actually, you know, we would not have gone live had we have not had that in place, because that was one of the reasons why we delayed 18 months ago from go live, because I wasn't prepared to take the risk about the transference of the data and the risk that came with it. So Dash was not working, to be fair, to start with. It was a big problem. It's been working now for probably about 5 weeks and working quite well. Comms, you know, the old adage is you know, comms, you can just keep doing it, can't you? We thought we'd done enough. We'd done briefings, we'd done lots of stuff in the media. We'd invited people like John Shear out in from the MEN, you know, over a period of time. And had it have all gone swimmingly, I don't suppose anybody would be asking me the question. But with hindsight, yes, we could have probably done more. And the moment it started to prove really difficult, you know, I started writing to council leaders, coming to see people, dealing with key stakeholders, etc., etc. But it's one of those things where you can never ever do enough, which probably leads to one of Stephen's questions, to be quite honest. Human perspective, yeah, it's been really tough. You know, and as I said, I spent hours going around police stations and custody suites, sitting and listening to people, and you could really sense the frustration and the upset. But underneath all of that, were they still going out and doing a really good job for the public? Were we still responding to 999 calls? Yes, we were. Were we still policing football matches? Were we still policing Extinction Rebellion? Yes, we were. None of those things stopped, but you got this real sense of frustration from people. But most of them, when they got over, actually my world changed yesterday and I wasn't expecting this level of change, we can understand why we needed to change and that we know it will get better and that we will fix it. That was, you know, that's the honest bit that I got from most. So, you know, what do? You sit and you listen, you make notes. You know, some of the teams I went to see were brilliant. They'd hand me a written list of here's all the issues that we've got. Some would just shout. But that's just human nature, isn't it? You know, and you're on that curve of change where people go through it and people get frustrated. So it's been really difficult for everybody in the organisation, I have to say. Not least helped by some of the unhelpful reporting that's gone on and some of the uninformed commentary that has gone on. That, you know, at one stage, I think it got to the point where we were spending more time trying to answer questions from the media than we were trying to fix the issues. Now, I don't blame the media. I absolutely don't blame the media, but it's fair to point out, because of the question that's been asked, some of it has been very unhelpful when we were trying to work through some significant issues. 6 months ago, what would I have done differently? I mean, this is really hard because people have said, well, why did you choose to go live in July? Why did you make that decision? Why did you do it then? Well, can I tell you there's never a good time to do it? So we clearly couldn't be doing it this week because we've got the Conservative Party conference in town. We couldn't have done it 2 weeks ago because of Extinction Rebellion. If I leave it till next month, we've got the busiest period of policing in the year with Halloween and Bonfire Night. And if I leave it till the month after, we're then into Christmas and New Year. So when there is a good time to do it? And with all of this, you have to try and manage risk in a balanced way. And so we went through operationally when's the best time to do it. If we hadn't have done it in July, we'd have probably been looking at early part of next year, probably March time. Were we satisfied that the things that we knew that wouldn't be working on day one, there was workarounds for them, and that there weren't any critical issues left to be signed off? Yes, we were, and that went through significant governance. What you didn't expect was the instability of the system when we went live, which caused an awful lot of problems because it didn't allow us to do the fixes fast enough. So I think 6 months ago, what would we have done differently? Probably more of the communication because of what's been said. If I'd have had a crystal ball and could have seen that some of the really technical things that created instability in the system that didn't show up in testing, I would have liked to have tried to be able to understand those, but I just don't think some of them that you could. So the virus checker, for example, was running, working, and so all the testing said it's working, all the analysis when we were having problems says it's working. Oh yeah, it was working. It was running at dynamic mode, so it was checking absolutely everything instead of running at batch mode. And at batch mode, it checks it periodically over a period of time, and in batches, dynamic mode, it checks everything all the time. So it just slowed the whole thing down to a halt. And there was 2 or 3 issues like that created instability in the system. And, you know, with hindsight, I wish we could have known what those would be and that it would have got pulled out in testing, because I think we would have been in a slightly different place. Wish list. The CJ stuff still remains a bit of a challenge for us, particularly the voluntary attendance. So if the fix that's gone in for that today works, then I wish that we can work through the backlog a bit quicker, and that might need some more people to get into that part of the process so that we can start issuing summonses and that sort of stuff. So that's for me probably the number one thing now in terms of dealing with that.
Thanks. I'm going to take another batch of questions. I'm conscious of the time, but I don't want to limit the discussion either. So if we can have as much brevity as possible in the questions and also in the answers without losing the actual sync of what we're doing, because I think it's actually quite important we do give this time. So we've got Mike and I've got David. Is there anybody else that wants to comment? We'll take those 2 first, and then we can...
Thank you, Chair.
Microphone, please, Mike.
Chief Constable, can I thank you for coming and for what you've had to say so far, which I think has been very revealing. There's a lot of technicality in the paper we've got in front of us, and you talk about the priority hypercare focus and administrative justice, and basically what you're saying in there is initially you had to fall back to paper records. And then you say, to your knowledge, and you said it in the meeting today, both GMP and CPS are not aware of any cases involving DV which have been dropped as a direct result of IOPS. Yet, you know, we've got people who talk to the press, a magistrate. Are they the uninformed source that say that has happened? Now, either we know or we don't know, and it does concern me in terms of the vulnerability of victims, and also the sort of service that some victims are probably not getting because of the problems. ACC Potts was very good with his presentation today. He's taken away a number of issues for me, which I'm very grateful of, and he'll come back to me. But I'll just speak now directly to the Deputy Mayor, because we scrutinise you, not Mr Hopkins. Do you believe the communication strategy of the force could and should have been better around the whole issue of the launch of IOPS and subsequently the handling of the press on that? Thank you. Those are my questions.
David.
I'm not interested so much in doing a post-mortem of what went wrong. I want to see where we go from here. And one thing which the Chief said was, I think, if I'm read it wrong, tell me, that we're about 2 months behind with the programme of what it should have been today. So that's one piece of news. What I also like to do is you tell me about the enhancements. What's the programme for enhancements? Not necessarily now, but if we knew it, because I think the danger is if we're not careful, we'll finish up with bad publicity again when an enhancement, which was not due till a certain date, is actually being criticised because it hasn't been achieved.
Deputy Mayor, we go to you first and then to Chief Constable.
Thank you. Well, yeah, in terms of the planning and the scrutiny and my involvement in that was very extensive, very regular, very frequent meetings about IOPS. I also met with Capita and Ernst Young at one point. Very regular meetings with ACC Sykes, who was put in charge of the project, and that explored all aspects of governance, including the preparations made for communications. So there was a detailed communications plan that had been going on for a long time, in addition to the training that GMP had put in place. And I have to say to you, it looked more than adequate. I think, and this is just a personal view in and around when the difficulties started, that for a short period of time relatively, but nonetheless significant period of time, problems were emerging from the staff. And I think that the technical team, You know, I don't think there was enough communication at that point in terms of listening carefully to what the staff were saying, rather than perhaps coming prematurely to the conclusion that the staff weren't sufficiently au fait with the system, because there were some examples where the staff weren't sufficiently au fait, but there were clearly, as the Chief Constable has said, definite glitches in the system. And I think at that point, we actually should have had a much more careful approach to the information that was coming from staff and a response that acted on that, analysed it properly and acted on that. And I think had that been the case, things would not have built up in perhaps the way that they did over those first few weeks.
Sorry. I would agree with Bev on that, and I discussed it. So this phrase user error crept into the language in GMP, where the technical people were saying, no, that's working. So a problem would be reported, and they'd say, no, it's working, so it's user error. Therefore saying that the individual member of staff didn't know how to use the system. And I very quickly said, hold on, there is no such thing as user error around here. This is a brand new system with people having to learn very new ways of working and understand it. We need to support them to be able to do it. The uninformed comment, Mike, refers to some of the stuff that goes on social media and then does play out in wider media. So I'll use that user error one as an example. So I have all of my senior team in 3 weeks ago, and I say to them that user error is banned in GMP. That's played out within 20 minutes on social media as I'm blaming user error again. Okay? It's that sort of uninformed reporting and commentary that has been incredibly unhelpful. No way would I ever suggest that a magistrate who may have a view, it might not be the right view, and what Martin Goldman has said is they have based all of their stuff on evidence, and to date there is no evidence that suggests what is being said. There are plenty of other reasons why cases are failing in court. We all know, and that's very, very well documented. The hypercare period, and this sort of does link to David Lancaster's question as well. So we estimated we were about 35 days behind the hypercare curve because of the instability in the system that I described. So when I'm sort of saying, look, we're a couple of months away from further stability and improvements, that's based on, we knew we were 35 days behind in that 90-day programme. In terms of the enhancements, there's stuff scheduled right through to next year. Now, some of it's really, really boring, as you get with all software. I am hoping that there's not going to be stuff in there that will cause significant failure within the system. But I honestly, hand on heart, can't sit here and say that because you've got the two elements of the system in police works and control works integrated. If they do something in police works and change the code and it has a knock-on effect in control works and it means that we lose control works for half an hour or an hour or whatever, I can't sit here and say that won't happen. I think what we've got better at is being able to communicate why the problem occurred and when it is likely to get fixed. But some of the software enhancements, you just wouldn't want to talk about them in a public domain because they're just stuff that, quite frankly, you don't need to know about. I don't need to know about. It just makes the system run more effectively. It's like having the engine management system in your car tuned slightly different when you plug it into a computer. Some of them are clearly ones that we know need to be put in place to make it work more efficiently going forward.
Sorry, enhancements not have to be part of the contract compliance?
So everything that they're doing at the moment is absolutely part of the contract, but some of it goes back, David, to the decision about go live and could you make everything perfect on day one? No, you couldn't, because we'd have been testing it until well into the next decade. And so we planned for some of the things with workarounds that we knew would be more manual workarounds until such time as the enhancements came on, focused on dealing with the critical ones, which allowed us to go live so that we weren't creating any further delay and therefore any additional costs that came with that.
I'm going to wrap it up, Stephen. I think we've had a very good discussion on the issues relating to the new computer system. I think it's, as someone who used to be in the IT industry, it's always very, very difficult, as you said, for implementing a new system. Even if that system has been working elsewhere, because every organisation has a slightly different way they work. But the pain that we're going through with the police work system will help forces elsewhere in the same way we benefited from controlled works working for us. I think we've got to take that account. I think we've expressed some of our feelings regarding communications and some of the information flow. And I think it would be useful because, one, there's us asking the questions, and two, the public know that we're asking these questions. If we have for the next couple of meetings a standing item as just a brief update as to where we're up to on IOPS, because it shows it keeps it in that public eye, I think that would be a useful for both the force and for us and for the public, so we know we've got a clear scrutiny path on that. I'd like to thank you again for that very honest and thoughtful way you've actually presented it, and the work that's actually gone on since July, both by yourselves and by the general members of GMP, who've actually made sure that despite all the other obstacles that come through with a lack, and I think we've got to be quite honest here as well, a lot more training could have taken place if we had more police on the force that we could actually allow out for training as well. So I think we've got to realise that finite resources has an impact on the delivery of any system. So I want to thank the day-to-day officers that are out there and managing to get through, and there is certainly light at the end of the tunnel, so thank you for those updates today. It is appreciated. I'm going to continue on with normal business. Obviously, we had a longer discussion on them than was planned. That's probably the longest chair special business I've ever been involved with. I'm going to suggest we actually defer until the next meeting, which is taking place in November, item 9, which is the Standing Together Outcomes Framework, because I think otherwise there's absolutely no chance of us coming through, and rather than risking losing conversation, I think that would be the most appropriate way to do it. So if people are happy with that, I'll move on with the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 2nd of July. Are people happy those are the correct record of the meeting? Yeah. And any issues arising from that? Just remind members there is a training session on Wednesday at the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service up in Bury. I hope members can attend. And there's a conference taking place which I'm planning to attend in November for police for members of this committee. Item 5 is the appointment of a vice chair. I think something we highlighted I think it came about last year, that it was within the constitution we didn't have the facility for a vice chair, and we proposed amendment to that constitution, which means we can now appoint a vice chair. So I'll open the floor for nominations for that post.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Janet Emsley.
Is that seconded?
I'd like to second that.
Thank you. Any further nominations? I'm happy to appoint Councillor Janet Emsley as our vice chair. Congratulations or commiserations, whichever way you want to take it. Thank you very much. I assume you're happy to take that post.
I am happy to take
Thank you. Moving on to item 6, which is the Greater Manchester Police and Crime 2019-20 preset update. And our Deputy Mayor, Beth.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, this report details for members of the panel the outcome in terms of the budget last year and the precept, and what that means in terms of the allocation of additional neighbourhood police officers into each of the 10 districts. As members will recall, I think, the precept funding for 2019-2020 enabled the recruitment of an additional 320 police officer posts. And in terms of recruitment exercise, that obviously is over and above the kind of normal business as usual recruitment that the police have to do to replace people who either leave or retire. That of itself is a very substantial exercise. Somewhere in the region of 400 and 500 police officers have to be replaced each year. So to contemplate an additional 320 is a very challenging recruitment exercise, and that's why what's been put in place is a very detailed project plan to oversee that recruitment this year. In fact, we estimate now those leaving will be just over 400, so it's not quite as challenging, but that still means around 720 odd police officers have to be recruited during the course of this financial year. That includes the 170 neighbourhood police officers, a new proactive force-wide team of 50 officers that can be deployed flexibly in response to particular local issues developing, local problems. A new transport team of 50 additional officers and direct entry recruitment, which will also support investigations around serious and violent crime. So recruitment today is on track to meet those figures, challenging though they are. 189 new officers are already in place, 65% male, 35% female, 17.4% from black and minority ethnic communities, which I think is very good to see that profile. Of the 170, the allocation in paragraph 2.2, which the Chief Constable and his officers make based on their own formula of problem solving and variety of indices in relation to levels of harm and risk, police incident and crime figures, as you see there, and you can see those figures. The new transport team will go live on the 18th of November from Eccles and Central Park police stations. It will operate Sunday to Thursday, 7 a.m. to 2 p.m, and Friday and Saturday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we'll have 2 inspectors, 5 sergeants and 50 constables in that team. So a substantial uplift. We now know as well, obviously, that the government plan to increase police numbers even further over the next 3 to 4 years. We've not been given our allocations for this first year, but we've made our own estimate of what we think it's likely to be, just to make sure that with this already challenging recruitment exercise, we can actually recruit additional as well. And we think, particularly because we were expecting to have to replace 500, it's now 400 and odd, we can contain the uplift when we get details of that within the recruitment plan and activity that we've got in place. So that's a brief summary of the report. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. I'll open up. I've got Stephen, I've got Mike, and I've got Amanda, and then David. I'll go in that order. So we'll take them in twos. Stephen first.
Cheers, Nigel. Thank you. It's to Ian, actually, please, if you don't mind. I'm glad you're still here, Ian, because I've got a chance to ask you this question now. Do you remember when we met and you said in your presentation to us about the precept, how difficult it is? You actually ended your presentation by saying this: make no mistake, the task that lies ahead of us is huge. And I looked at you that day and I thought, yeah, he means that. Tell in your eyes, he definitely meant it. So now you've started this implementation to recruit. Is it harder than what you thought?
I'll take Mike's and we'll take them in twos.
It's good, isn't it? How can you follow that? On 2.2 on the allocation, the 10 posts for Trafford, which is where I represent. Of course, you know, I was talking with the police commander at Trafford and said, "Oh, it's great you get another 10 posts." He said, "Yeah." She said, "But it won't even meet the loss of the staff that she's hemorrhaging, which is 5 and a sergeant and 5 to the travel unit, another 4 to somewhere else," which is great development for the officers, but it's not such good news for my residents in Trafford.
Do you mean, Mike, that there's some staff being abstracted from that or moved from their own position in Trafford to do other things?
Yeah, they're being transferred into the travel unit. So she's losing the sergeant and 5 to the travel unit, 4 to some other unit, 3 here, but she's getting 10 back, which doesn't cover what she's losing.
The Chief Constable tells me some of those staff are actually applying for the opportunities elsewhere as a result of the budget. I mean, that's something that, you know, the Chief Constable and his senior team will talk to the Chief Superintendent in Trafford about, because there should be an uplift eventually, when it washes through, of 10 posts into Trafford, whatever people are applying for in the meantime.
Mike, I've been away for a few days, so the plan around, so we advertised for the travel unit first, bearing in mind that it's probably not going to be the most popular choice for people, whereas the proactive team probably would be. So we did the travel unit first, and as Bev has said, when that will go live, there's a management process behind it to make sure that no one district suffers a disproportionate amount of people joining it. So people may have applied, but they might not all get those posts, because I said exactly the same. You know, if Trafford or Bury suddenly decide that 25 people want to leave and go on the travel unit, it's not sustainable for those divisions. So the reason I'm saying I've not been around for a few days, I don't know whether they've done that exercise to balance it yet, but we'll check that for you. Do you want me to answer the first question about, was it harder than I thought? So yes and no, I suppose, is the answer. And that's not me sitting on the fence, because that's not like me at all. But the yes and no bit. So is it hard in that people want to join Greater Manchester Police? No, it isn't. Quite frankly, we are inundated with really good quality people wanting to join us. It's hard in that we are being particularly focused around trying to attract more women and more colleagues from Black and Asian minority ethnic backgrounds. And whilst we're having some real success with that, we are having to continue to work relentlessly with communities, with community groups, to make sure that we're achieving that. Is it hard because some of the routes in are different to how when Mike joined and I joined? Yes, it is, and in particular because some of my colleagues don't think anything should change. So, for example, the Detective Development Programme, the Federation and I have just had to agree that we are going to disagree because they don't think I should do it, and we're talking about 20 people. For every one of those posts, we had 60 applicants. 60 applicants. For the police now, the uniformed version of that programme, it's one post for every 30 applicants. So we've got some really talented people coming into the organisation through different routes that wouldn't have thought about policing as a career previously. But the overwhelming majority still join in the way that we joined and go through the process. So yes, it's hard in some ways. No, it's not in others. It's really actually quite encouraging. I think the other bit, and Bev touched on it, that's really very interesting for us, that this is the first year since austerity hit that the numbers, that we model the numbers of people that are leaving, and mostly people leave because they get to their 30 years service and they're leaving with their pension, as a small number, and it was 53 last year that left because they got a job elsewhere or they transferred to another force or we sacked them. But for the first time we're seeing the numbers that could retire slow down, which is why it's 100 less that we needed to recruit, because rather than it being 500 leaving, it's 400. So again, I think that's quite encouraging because we're retaining skills, and because of all the recruitment we're doing, the front line, depending on where you are in Greater Manchester, varies between about 45 and 60% of them being student officers. And that's really hard. And I think the final point on that, because I know Nigel wants me to keep my answers shorter, but Bev's point about the 20,000 uplift, that's going to be really, really hard, because if we're not careful, we're going to inundate districts with really inexperienced staff. And I think there's going to have to be a real workforce planning exercise to say, how do we manage people that are going into specialist roles, whether it's detectives, whether it's traffic, whether it's working in domestic abuse, whatever it is, with I can't have a front line that is wholly made up of student officers. So that's going to be incredibly hard.
Thank you. We've got Amanda and then David. Is anybody else planning to ask on this? Because I'll try and get them all in one. We'll just take those two then. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Some of my questions have already been answered, but I have got some points around the table and how this information is presented. The top line of the table that talks about student officers, I'm assuming that is to cover the whole recruitment process for people who are retiring, leaving, as well as new officers. I would like to see that separated if possible, just so that we know who the numbers that are actually leaving and the numbers that are new officers. Simply because when I need to report back to residents in Stockport and to Cabinet and Council, I want a clear picture of what this actually means for Stockport. Because when I see those figures there of 600 cadets going through, and it equates to 14 posts for Stockport, and actually what that really means is 4 beat officers and the other 10 are part of other operational teams. I want that clarity so that we know exactly what we're getting for the precepts that we're paying, because the likelihood is that we will have some additional precepts going forward, and we're going to have to be very clear about what we're going to get for our money.
David?
two things. I'd appreciate not an answer today, but to a little more detail about how the measurement is, and for numbers of police officers are actually worked out for each district. Because I think it's important out there with the serious crime we've got on at the moment, that we've got to be able to answer where those police officers are and where they're working, and the justification or not for where they're actually going is critical in my view. The other thing which on the precept, which I just briefly wanted to mention, and again I'm not looking for the answer today, but remind us that was one of the items we'd raised previously, was the position where we are now on 101 and 999 service, where we are with the dropout rates and response times, to me are critical and still being questioned by members of the public.
Okay. Just quickly, I mean, what the chart shows, Amanda, is it's a flow chart for the big process of recruitment. And that 593 on the top, as you say, are student officers coming through that pipeline. Then transferees and the police now and the direct entrance underneath. It's kind of to help chart and make sure that we're on progress to meet that 720, so on. So, but I mean, if it's helpful at a future meeting to see if we can separate that out in terms of how many of the new, each month of the 170, I mean, it doesn't really matter because they all need to be replaced, and they'll all be replaced with, well, there'll either be a new appointment, new recruit, or a replacement, and they will be cadets, they will be students. Do you see what I mean? So the real question I think you want to know is, in terms of people who may be retiring from Stockport, how do they get replaced? Is that the seat of your concern?
It's about being able to say to people, this is what the new money is buying. This is what it means for Stockport.
Okay. I mean, that's what we have tried to do here with the new money. The allocation of those resources is an operational decision for the Chief Constable. I'm sure he'll be happy to spell out in a little more detail at a future meeting how that works, that formula works, and also the issues on 101 on the call handling. I think, a lot of the loss of people in the call handling section are actually people who want to go on and stay in the police service and become PCSOs, and eventually some of them become police officers. So that's good, but it does mean that there's a turnover in, yeah.
Just building on what Bev said, so Jeanette's coming to talk to us about the formula so that people can understand it a little better in terms of that allocation of those new posts. The bit I would say about this, though, is just always remember, those are ones that are going into local policing. Behind all of this are all of the force assets, and, Salford and Bolton, and at the moment Oldham and Wigan are getting a disproportionate amount of force assets because of some of the really difficult things that they've got going on. So in terms of that explanation to councillors, it is more complex than just the new ones that you're getting locally, and that's the discussion to have with your local commander about what support are you getting around dealing with some of your serious and organised crime and some of your major incidents as well.
I think this update's been really useful, but I think it's also worth putting into context of what the £24 in the Band D property actually gave us within Greater Manchester. I think we were talking about £18 million. Now, when you put that into officers' wages in the back room in the 101, and then actually put that down to Stockport, it's very hard, or to Manchester or to Salford, it's hard to actually realise what it is. One thing we've been clear at when we agreed that precept last year and in previous years is that even the government accepted there's not enough resources going to policing. We had to do what we could do. I think it's making sure we can actually clearly identify that. And the ask we had regarding neighbourhood policing and safety on transport and 101 service, this report's actually clearly outlining some of the work that's going on. And I think the bit that David highlighted, I think that will be useful on the 101. Once it's stabilised after current things, obviously data's probably going to be a bit skewed after our first item that we talked about. Once we've got some stability there, I think that would be useful. Are people happy to accept this report? Yes. Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 7. I'm going to take the report as read and open straight up to questions, if that's okay. And I've got Mike indicating any other further questions. Just Mike, your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I really liked this report because it just demonstrates the work that the Deputy Mayor's doing. I don't want the answers today, Bev. I just want an update on this. 18th of April, project to deliver a state strategy for GMP's data centre to the value of 471,000. Just like some further detail about what that exactly was. 10th of June, development of an integrated health and justice strategy for Greater Manchester, strategy awarded to Strategy for Change. I was just wondering what the value of that contract was. And lastly, 17th of June, perimeter security services, approval to tender for the supply of perimeter security services. Is that using security to look after our police stations or our buildings? Or?
It is part of the,
Yep.
part of the estate.
Part of the estate?
There's a story about that. I can't quite remember now, but I'll come back to you.
Yes, just, I don't want the answers today. Just, that'd be fine. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I think this is the first time we've had the report, and I think we was trying to work out what kind of detail we wanted, which I think is useful, and those questions are very pertinent. I think probably useful, again, I know you want the happy with the details being distributed to us later, bits like that, drop an email, I'm sure we're more than happy to get them. But that's been very, very helpful.
I mean, these are... But, I beg your pardon. These are all published on the GMCA website, you know, and updated. But if you'd like an updated report at every meeting, we can just bring this. And if this format is okay, if it isn't, give me some feedback about the format. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I think people find it useful. It just gives it a quick summary and it's there without creating an onerous task. I think it's quite useful just to have a quick look. Okay, moving on to item 8. And is Damien picking this one up? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Conscious that this is a long report and that we've not got a huge amount of time, so I'll try and summarise it by pulling out the really key points from this. So what we're talking about here is a national rise in serious violence that we've seen in Greater Manchester, but which the Home Office and the Home Secretary recognise as being a particular threat. So last year, the Home Office published its serious violence strategy, within which it talks very specifically about certain types of serious violence that it deemed to be worryingly on the increase, and it highlighted things like gang activity, knife crime related to that, homicides, criminal exploitation. In the months since the publication of that strategy, what we've been doing in terms of our engagement with Home Office is ensuring that strategy is translated into something meaningful for Greater Manchester. Because clearly some of the issues that we're seeing play out in the media, for example in London or other parts of the country, do not necessarily reflect the issues that we face in Greater Manchester. So in order to be able to pull all of that together into something meaningful that means something in terms of the issues that we face, we've done a number of pieces of work, the first of which was to better understand the data from GMP. So looking very specifically at what the knife crime data that GMP hold tells us. And the report gives you some insight into that, particularly in relation to in the annex where Manchester Metropolitan University have done some very clever work with algorithms and artificial intelligence to understand in more detail what the knife crime picture looks like for Greater Manchester. We've supplemented that with a really comprehensive programme of community consultation that we initially piloted in Salford and then went out for the rest of Greater Manchester. That has been incredibly insightful and specifically intended to reach into communities and speak to people that we may not otherwise have spoken to through previous approaches and previous community consultation exercises. We've spoken to a number of young people, young offenders, we've been to schools, we've spoken to teachers, we spoke to frontline professionals, we've been into pubs, spoken to taxi drivers, and really tried to get a feel for concerns in their communities in relation to in relation to violent crime. And the third bit of that is to look at what exists nationally and internationally in terms of best practice. The government is very keen that we take on board the learning from Glasgow and its public health approach to dealing with violence up there. but making that, again, meaningful for us in Greater Manchester in terms of our unique partnership arrangements and the way in which we deal with things here. The Mayor and Deputy Mayor and Chief Constable and others are very keen that whatever approach we take is informed by and led by the community, and that we do that with our partners in the voluntary sector, and that we have a commitment in place with the Home Office to utilise some of the money that's been given to us to set up a violence reduction unit, and the details of that are in your report, including who we would want to sit in that team. I think the key to that team will be to have a balanced approach, to look at, obviously, the policing activity that's required and that targeted operational policing and tough enforcement action against serious violent offenders, but balancing that out with a longer-term vision in relation to how we prevent and intervene and work with young people in particular to reduce the likelihood of violent offences happening in the future. And clearly within that, knife crime is of particular concern, I think, to everyone. And that this has come out time and time again from the work that we've done, that this fear that many people are talking about that leads them to feel like they need to protect themselves, or in some cases, unfortunately, carry a weapon. And I think whatever we seek to do through that violence reduction work and any campaigns that come out of this is focusing on that and the consequences of that, potential consequences of carrying a knife. We are imminently about to publish a violence action plan, the details of which are contained in the report. That will be part of the Greater Manchester Health and Justice Strategy. It's a key priority within that forthcoming strategy. I've highlighted there what the high-level priorities will be in the violence action plan. I'm hoping there are no surprises in there. It covers everything that I've talked about, but with a particular focus on valuing the work and adding value to the work that schools do, that colleges, alternative provision, and that people who are on the front line, who are seeking to safeguard our young people, how we can add value to that, to the work that's already taking place in local authorities and community safety partnerships around that. In order to assist with that, we've provided and devolved some budgets to community safety partnerships in year to do that work. We thought that was really vital and supported that place-based commitment that locally the solutions to some of these issues sit with those local partnerships and those local organisations. Interestingly, what we chose to do was insist that work through community safety was done with Directors of Children's Services, Safeguarding Children's Boards, Directors of Public Health, and those other key local individuals and partnerships, because we felt it was necessary that we had that very balanced approach to how those action plans were being and spending plans were being delivered locally. I'll stop there because I'm sure there'll be questions, and I think I've covered everything in the report, but I'm happy to take any questions that you've got on any of that.
Thank you, Damien. I think a very important paper and very clear as to some of the ways forward. And if we get this right, it can help a lot in a lot of ways. Anyway, opening up to questions rather than my rambling. Any comments, Stephen? And Stephen, then go to Angela.
Chair, I'm sorry about this. I'm just going to have to mourn for a minute. I did this at full council, so please bear with me when I tell you all this. You just talked then about knife crime. Our youth councillor in Oldham did a notice a motion about knife crime. And I got up in full council, I thought, shall I say this? Shall I not? And I just said, as I'm going to say it now. What is it in the mental set of somebody that goes up with a knife, thrusts it forward, young or old, not thinking, crikey, they could die if I project that forward. What's that all about? I mean, years ago, please don't misunderstand what I'm going to say now. Years ago, you could knock a couple of teeth out of a fight with somebody and that'd be it. It's unacceptable, it's bad, it's totally bad, but it's not like stabbing somebody. And I remember saying to Danny English, Ian, our district commander in Oldham, brilliant, Bobby, and I turned around to him and asked him the same question. He said, Stephen, you're looking at it all wrong. And I said, why? He said, why would anybody, if they had a knife, living in a one-bedroom flat, in a mattress, they've got no job, they've got no money, prison's not even a deterrent, why should they bother about anything? And that's the bit. How the hell do you change that mental set of somebody to make them think differently? So you can have as many strategies as you want on the good. The document's excellent, it's absolutely excellent. But it just makes you realise, doesn't it, Nigel, just how much society's changed so much that these days people walk out through that door, just go over half and just go, I don't care. How do you solve that?
Angela, how do you follow that?
I could answer half of that, but I won't. My question really is that, you know, the community-led approach that was supported by yourself and the Mayor, I'm kind of anxious to find out what that looks like, how it's going to work, because the Community Safety Partnership money came out. It was barely enough for many organisations to do anything over 6 months. It didn't allow for the scoping work to be done in specific local wards in terms of coordination. It had to be done across Manchester. So there were lots of things that were missed in the distribution of that funding. I suppose I'm looking for some reassurance that what was said around the table is actually meant and will be delivered on and acted upon.
Okay, any other comments on this paper as well? And we'll get the answer on that. Okay, Damien, do you want to start off and then Bev? Okay. Or Bev?
Yep, okay. Just picking up Angela's point, I think in terms of the overall amount of money that we got from the government, £8.1 million, not much short of half of that is actually going out across the 10 districts. That's right, Damien, isn't it? So in terms of the funding envelope we got, we've invested a significant proportion of it in the communities. It's the fact that we've got 10 districts that's shared across them, but I think that represents the commitment and the confidence that we've got, that we do need and want a very strong community-led approach. Now, you're right in implying, I think if you're implying this, that the way in which that spending is developed in each of those districts has to be led in those districts. It's not something we can and should do from the kind of violence reduction unit centralised here in GMCA and with GMP. That has to be down to local partners, the local authorities, the community safety partnerships, with their voluntary sector colleagues, working out what are the priorities then in our district, whether it's Manchester, Bolton or wherever, and making those decisions together. Now, we are pushing that message very, very hard. And once the governance arrangements get up and running, we'll continue to push that. The CSPs have had to, the community safety partnerships have had to put into to us, their detailed plans for approval so that we can see what they're planning to spend on, and we will be monitoring that, not just in terms of what they're doing, but how they're doing it. But that has to be led locally. That has to be led locally. We cannot and should not be doing it from the centre.
I think Stephen's a bit more comment. Angela's looking to come back. If you say more, I'll let you. Yeah.
No disrespect, Deputy Mayor, but I think that there's something I missed there. You've said that, you know, the community partnerships will be leading with the community and the district services, and that's not happening as yet, as far as I'm aware. And you said that the majority of money went to the community, and that's not the case. I think what I'm pushing for, and I think I'm really passionate about this, is probably coming across, it's not a personal attack on you, Bev. What I'm pushing for is to ensure that this year, 2019, 2020, we go away allowing the community to actually lead, and that we don't fall back into old patterns of where the statutory agencies take the money, believe that they're doing a greater good, engage in one-off consultation events with the community and call it an intervention. Do you know, I really believe that we're wanting to allow the community to speak up and lead on the initiatives. People around the table earlier asking the questions, why do young people pick up a knife and want to kill somebody? It's because they feel that no one's being listened to. They feel that there's no future and there's no hope. There's nothing for them. They're living in poverty, as they would see it as poverty. They will see it as no hope, and they see people around the table that do not look like them or even speak for on behalf of them, and that has got to change. So I'm just letting you know now, I'd like to see what was said around the table, around the Reform Board actually taking on in relation to allowing communities across Greater Manchester to lead statutory agents, working alongside with them in the fight against violence and youth crime.
Angela, thanks for that. And one thing I've known in all the years I've known you is your commitment and passion to actually making sure that representation is made. I think you mentioned you're looking at Manchester, and obviously I've got some responsibility in Manchester, and I'll speak to Fiona, who chairs our CSP, and work out what's actually gone on, so we can actually speak to you and look at the community there, because there is some good work going on. There is some good work with community organisations going on, but we've got to make sure that you are convinced that good work is going on as well. So we'll sit down with you and we can go through that. But no, thank you for that ongoing work and making sure it's on all of our agendas, because that's it is important to all of us. So thank you for that. Are people happy with that report? I think we're moving on that. Obviously, we've got a lot. This is kind of, there's a lot happened very quickly, and a lot's going to happen over the next 6 months. Anything we can be doing to help and support where we are here, and that's probably going to be happening more on the ground in our own boroughs, where it's going forward. I know the work we're doing in Manchester with you is hopefully groundbreaking. I think we've got to do something different because we can't continue the way we are. I think that's what the one belief is we've all got. So no, thank you for that work. So I've deferred item 9, and we'll bring that back at the November meeting, because to allow us to have a proper conversation on that. So I'm going to move on to item 10, which is we've said we'd have a look at the Standing Together plan and actually focus in one of the themes on each area. So looking at theme 1 on this, and I'll hand it straight over.
Thank you, Chair. I think the first thing to say is that the Police and Crime Plan, Standing Together, is actually a document not just for the police, but it's a document for community safety partners, for local authorities, for health, for the voluntary and community sector, because all of the issues raised in there cannot be addressed by one organisation alone, and very much need that partnership approach. In a way, and I know why you did this, Chair, there are 2 kind of mechanisms for accountability. One is the outcomes framework, which we would have had, which will give us the high-level outcomes in terms of the impact of what we're doing and how satisfied members of the public feel with that, and whether it's changing perceptions of what's happening in their community. And the other is to give you a narrative about what we're actually doing to try and meet those high-level objectives. So this report is talking about priority 1, which is keeping people safe, where there were 10 headline commitments. And the report, and I'm not going to go through all this because it's quite detailed, but it tells you the most important things that we've been doing to try and make progress on those priorities, whether it's about cohesion, victim services, antisocial behaviour and drugs, fraud and economic crime, domestic abuse, complex safeguarding, honour-based abuse, mental health, modern slavery. I'd very much welcome some feedback on the format, because I really appreciate that this is a narrative report. It can't by its nature give you hard outcomes from this kind of detail, but we thought you'd want to see some of the detail and get a sense of, I think, some of the really important work that's going on in conjunction with you at local level. Most of these things identified here and that we describe are actually being done not just by the police, but, as I say, other services as well. So I thought the most useful thing I could say was just give that brief introduction. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy to take any requests for any further detail around any of the items in here, and to come back to members, but also particularly any feedback either now or afterwards by email on the actual format, because I really welcome the interest in understanding what is actually being done to meet these commitments. But I want to give it you in a form that you find most useful. So that feedback on how we can, whether this is okay or whether you'd like something else, would be really helpful to us in doing the next report, when I presume we'll look at priority 2. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, happy to open that up. Any comments on it? Mike.
I'd just like to say it is a very interesting report, and I'd just like to say that work within, I'd be interested to know what work's going on within the 10 boroughs. I know that the Mayor of Trafford, who this year, his theme is community cohesion, and he has pulled together the Trafford community cohesion group, and I actually attended a meeting, and it was well attended. There were probably 35, 40, maybe 50 people there from all different faiths, all different groups. And it was a really good roundtable discussion, and a lot of good ideas were brought up about keeping people safe, about reducing harm and offending, and about strengthening communities and how we can all work together to make it a better, Trafford a better place and a safer place. So I'd be interested to know how, what's the response in each of our 10 local areas.
In fact, we've already done something on that. We published not long ago an annual report in which we summarise some of this work that's been done and some of the kind of police-focused activity. But we also had a section at the end for each district to put in the highlights from what they've been doing on a local basis in their partnerships. So that's online. You can access that. And again, come back to me on that. If you want more information of that kind, we can collate that and bring it here.
Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say that I do like this format. I like the bold heading so that it stands out and you can pick up on the bits that are really interesting. Then you can drill down to the further detail if you want to. It gives you a quick synopsis of what is happening, and then that for me is going to be the trigger for me to go and look at other things in more detail. So yes, I do like the format.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. I think it's great when we get the annual update. So it's nice when we get the nice glossy bit to start off with, and then we get the annual update, which is quite glossy. But this is actually showing in depth, or in a summary depth, I suppose, is the best way of doing it, which is nice and easy to read. And it's probably something that's probably worth distributing to our members in our own authorities, because we do the things going forward. I think it's quite clear of what's going on, and then we can say we're going to do the update on 2 and 3 as well, so people can see what's going on. I'll bring Janice in.
Yeah, just to say that it's very reflective, and it says that roundtable discussions have been held. Is there any truck in giving us a bit of a forward-looking one as well, where we can see what's coming up, so that we can engage with those things? For example, this Friday we've got an honour-based abuse, forced marriage, karma, nirvana survivors roadshow in Rochdale, and it's full, so you can't get on it, but there might be other things that members might want to engage with in future. It'd be really good to have that information if it's available. I'm not trying to make work for anybody. I just think that if those diary dates are available, it would be useful to the panel.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We can think about adding to this a kind of forward look, or even bringing a forward look to each meeting across the whole of the plan, really. Yeah.
That's great. No, so I think there's general acceptance. It's a useful addition, and yes, I know we have really played around with the agenda. It would have been great to sat with some of the work we're doing, but it's welcomed. Thank you very much. I'm going to move over to Jeanette now for item 11.
Yes, hopefully. Hopefully a very quick item. There's a standing agenda item of yours, which is your forward look in terms of the meetings we've got scheduled in for the rest of this financial year, and currently the agenda items that we've got lodged for each of those individual meetings. We will obviously add standing together outcomes framework to the November meeting, which we've deferred from today. As you can see, all of the new items that the Deputy Mayor's Office kindly agreed to in terms of the decisions and actions and the standing together focuses on each of the priorities are reflected in the forward look as well. Really for you to approve the forward look, and as ever, members are invited to contact me directly if there's something they want to put on the agenda, or of course the Chair, you can contact him as well.
Just adding to the decision made earlier regarding the IOPS updates, they say it doesn't need to be a comprehensive report, but just we've got something there as an update. I think it's going forward. Everyone happy with that? I think the 8th annual conference for that is actually the day after.
Okay.
So we'll defer that to the meeting after. Otherwise, I can't really give an update on what's going to happen the day. I'm not quite that clever. So. I know it's been a bit of a rush on those final items. I want to thank everyone for their contributions today. I think it's been a productive meeting. I think the time we spent early on, I think was really, really useful. I think it gave us a clear way forward. I'd like to thank both the Chief Constable, but particularly to the Deputy Mayor. We've tried to change how we're doing these panels a bit to be that bit more transparent and having things like the decisions in there and moving and a clear, trying to have as much conversation in public as we can do to show we've got that accountability. And I think it's worked very well today, and that's been given by your office facilitating that. I know we're looking at how we can actually get that information disseminated down to individual councillors who can then get it out to their electors, because that's what we're all here. We're scrutinising on behalf of the residents of Greater Manchester. I know that's something we're working together to see how we can get that improved. But certainly want to thank you. I think it's been a really productive meeting, if not a little bit rushed, but it's certainly been useful. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.